April 30th is fast approaching, and Invincible VS is about to land on PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. And look, this is one of those games that's flying under the radar way more than it should. I personally was surprised by a few things in this game, so I decided to round up the 10 details that caught my eye the most. You might think you know everything there is to know about this title, but wait until the end of this list to say that. I'm Matthew, and the video is starting now. If you're a fighting game fan and saw the first footage of Invincible VS, you probably got that familiar "I've seen this somewhere before" feeling, that combo speed, that absurd fluidity in the movements. And it's no coincidence, the team behind the game is Quarter Up, and within that studio are members who worked directly on the 2013 Killer Instinct, the very game that resurrected the franchise and became a technical benchmark for an entire generation of fighting games. This isn't just a resume detail, it's the DNA of the entire game. You know that combo breaking system that requires reading your opponent, precise timing, and a good dose of psychological pressure? It comes from there. Killer Instinct was revolutionary precisely for creating long, devastating combos while simultaneously giving you the tools to react and turn the tide mid-combo. Invincible VS is clearly drinking from that same well. For me, this is one of the most exciting reasons to keep an eye on this game. It's not just a comic book adaptation with cool characters. It's a project made by people who truly understand what makes a fighting game technically satisfying. The foundation is solid before the game even launches. There are games that are violent just to look mature, throwing a little blood here and there and calling it a day. Invincible VS isn't playing around. What they've built here is a visual damage system that works in real time, and when you see it in action, the difference is immediate. As the fight progresses, characters' clothes progressively tear, blood literally sticks to the hands of the attacker, and the face of the one taking the beating accumulates bruises and wounds that reflect exactly how much damage that character took. It's not a cutscene, it's not static art, it's happening while you play. This completely changes how you read the fight. You can visually perceive the character's state without having to stare at the health bar all the time. A black eye, a shredded shirt, a bloodied fist, it all tells the story of the combat as it unfolds. Previews are already highlighting this as one of the game's strongest points. For an Invincible adaptation, it makes perfect sense. The comics and the show are delicate. That universe thrives on showing the physical consequences of violence in a brutal, honest way. Bringing that to the game isn't just about aesthetics. It's about truly respecting the tone of the source material. If you've ever played a fighting game online, you know exactly what it's like to get caught in a combo that never ends. You just sit there, helpless, watching your health bar melt, while the opponent executes the same repeated sequence they clearly memorized by heart. There's nothing creative about it, and honestly, not much fun either. Invincible VS has a very direct answer to this problem. The game features a visible combo meter that fills up as the sequence of hits progresses. When that bar reaches its limit, the opponent automatically falls regardless of what the attacker is doing. Simple, visual, and efficient. The inspiration from the Killer Instinct system is clear, but applied here with a very specific goal: to eliminate infinite combos and force players to think instead of just memorizing. The practical impact of this is huge. You can no longer rely on a memorized sequence until the end of the fight. You have to decide where to end the combo, how to use the space you have, and what to do after the opponent hits the ground. This transforms combat into an exercise in creativity and situational reading, not just mechanical execution. To me, this kind of system is what separates a well-thought-out fighting game from one that simply exists. Rewarding creativity and penalizing repetition is smart design, and the fact that Quarter Up made this a core mechanic says a lot about what they want this game to be in the competitive scene. There's one thing fighting games rarely manage to capture truly: that feeling that the battle is destroying everything around it. Stages are usually beautiful and well animated, but they're basically wallpaper. You fight in front of them, not with them. Invincible VS seems to have decided to tackle exactly that point, and the result is something that grabs your attention in the first few seconds of gameplay. The game's stages feature real progressive destruction. Buildings collapse, cars fly, and the environment gives way as the fight scales up. But what really elevates this is the area transition system. A strong enough hit can hurl the opponent out of the current stage and cinematically transport you to a completely different environment, from a destroyed city straight into orbit, for example. It's the kind of thing that looks like it's from a trailer, but it's happening in the middle of your match. This creates a dynamic that goes beyond visuals. Each transition changes the context of the battle, the available space, possibly the physics of the environment, and above all, the emotional rhythm of the fight. You're not just winning a round, you're literally sending your opponent to another planet. That has narrative weight, and in a game based on Invincible, it makes total sense. What impresses me is that this type of feature usually stays only in big budget games, and even then, it's often superficial. Quarter Up is clearly trying to build something that goes beyond basic adaptation service. Environments that react, evolve, and participate in the fight, that's design ambition, and it's the kind of detail that turns a common session into something you want to show someone else. Tag team fighting games usually have a clear problem. Character switching often becomes too safe of a mechanic. You call your partner whenever you want, with little cost and little risk. It's comfortable, but it strips depth from the system. Invincible VS took this mechanic and put a knife to its throat, and I mean that as a compliment. The system is called defensive tag or tag save, and the idea is simple in theory. When your character is taking a combo, you can trigger the switch to bring in your partner and interrupt the sequence, saving the one who is getting beaten. It sounds like a useful emergency exit, and it is, but only if you nail the timing. If you miss, the character entering the fray takes bonus damage and is left vulnerable, essentially turning a defensive attempt into a punishment. This detail completely changes how you think during a fight. You can no longer mash the switch button in desperation and hope for the best. You need to read the rhythm of the enemy combo, identify the right window, and make a conscious decision under pressure. And your opponent knows this too, which means combos can be built specifically to mess with that timing and induce errors. To me, this is the kind of mechanic that defines a game's skill ceiling. It's easy to understand, hard to master, and changes the outcome of a match in very concrete ways. When you pull off a perfect tag save at a critical moment, the satisfaction is immediate. When you fail and see your partner come in already taking damage, the pain is just as immediate. Both feelings make the game feel more alive. One of the things that most destroys licensed games is when you realize the story was written by someone who watched a 3-minute summary of the source material. The characters sound wrong, the motivations don't make sense, and that essence that makes the franchise special simply vanishes. It's frustrating, and it happens with a frequency that has almost become... Invincible VS is coming with a very different approach. The game's story mode was developed in partnership with writers from the Amazon animated series, including Helen Lee, and features the involvement of Robert Kirkman, the original creator of the comic. This means that the people writing the dialogue and building the game's narrative are the same ones who defined the tone of the series you already know. It's not a third-party adaptation trying to imitate a voice. It is the original voice. The practical impact of this goes beyond the story mode itself. The dialogue that happens during the fights themselves was written with this same care, maintaining each character's personality, the acidic humor, the emotional weight, and the tensions that exist between them within the universe. When Mark and Omni-Man exchange words before a round, it's going to sound like the real Mark and Omni-Man. For me, this is the detail that transforms a licensed game into something truly worth it. Good mechanics are essential, and impressive visuals help a lot, but when the story and characters are right, the game gains a layer that no combat system can replace. And having Kirkman in the process ensures that no one is going to ruin what he built. The motion mode in Invincible VS is simple to explain. You go into the menu, toggle the option, and the game starts accepting classic fighting game inputs. Quarter circles, dragon punches, the commands any veteran recognizes instantly. If you have years of arcade stick experience, the game will respond exactly how you expect. But what makes this relevant is the context. Invincible VS was built with simplified commands as the default, focusing on accessibility and a broader audience. This is usually the point where more experienced players start to turn up their noses, feeling that depth was sacrificed to please beginners. Quarter Up resolved this conflict directly. They didn't choose a side. The simplified system remains the foundation, accessible to those just arriving in fighting games. Motion mode is an optional layer on top of that, preserving the experience of those who grew up with Street Fighter, King of Fighters, and the classics of the genre. Neither audience is ignored, and neither is forced to use something they don't want. This might seem like a small detail, but in the competitive fighting game scene, it makes a real difference. An arcade stick player has a physical relationship with motion inputs that goes beyond preference. It's years of muscle memory. Giving them that option isn't just about comfort, it's about respect. There's a specific moment in the Invincible comic and series where you realize this isn't a standard superhero story. It's when the violence appears without a filter, without camera cuts, without metaphors brutally literal. And any game that wants to be an honest adaptation needs to have the courage to go to that same place. Invincible VS clearly did. Heroic Boost is a state that speeds up the character and powers up specials, making the hits faster and visually more violent. It's impactful on its own. But Overkill is where the game really shows its cards. When you eliminate an opponent with a heavy hit at the right moment, their body literally explodes into pieces, with blood flying all over the screen. It's not a subtle animation. It wasn't meant to be. What interests me here isn't just the visual spectacle, it's the coherence with the source material. Invincible, both in the comic and the Amazon series, uses gore intentionally. It exists to show that in that universe, consequences are real and the limits are different. A game that softened this would be telling a different story from the one Kirkman created. Quarter Up understood that fidelity to a franchise goes beyond putting the right characters on screen. It goes all the way to the tone, the brutality, and the discomfort that Invincible purposefully causes. Overkill isn't in the game because it looks cool in a trailer. It's there because without it, the game wouldn't truly be Invincible. Think about how many modern fighting games actually give you control over how you want to play. Not just difficulty, not just combo assists, but the entire control scheme. The honest answer is almost none. Invincible VS is doing something that seems obvious but rarely happens in practice. The game offers two completely distinct schemes. The default is the traditional 6-button layout, accessible and direct, with a dedicated button for specials. If you activate the motion input mode, that button disappears, and the game essentially becomes a 5-button fighter, where specials are executed via classic quarter circle and dragon punch commands, exactly like Street Fighter and the genre's classics. It's not a cosmetic tweak. It's a real change in how you interact with the game. What this means in practice is that two players with completely different backgrounds can sit down for the same session and each use the scheme that makes the most sense for them. The arcade stick veteran with years of muscle memory and motion inputs doesn't have to adapt to a system they don't want. The more casual player doesn't have to memorize commands to enjoy the whole game. This is rare because it requires work, balancing two distinct control systems without one breaking the other and without one being clearly superior competitively is a design decision that consumes time and planning. The fact that Quarter Up did this shows they took both the new player and the veteran seriously without treating either as a secondary audience. There are details about a game that technically change nothing in the gameplay, don't affect combat, and don't add any new systems, but they say everything about who made it and why. The name of the studio behind Invincible VS is exactly that kind of detail. Quarter Up is an internal tribute. When part of this team was still working together on Killer Instinct, they had a recurring joke among themselves that they were only one quarter or one member away from truly completing the group. It was the kind of phrase that circulates among people who work well together, who know what they want to build, but who didn't yet have the conditions to do it on their own. The name stuck, became an identity, and when the studio finally formed, the choice was obvious. What touches me about this story is that Invincible VS isn't just Quarter Up's first game. It's the realization of something this group of people was mentally constructing long before the studio even existed. The name carries that weight. Each member who joined to close that quarter was a piece that fit into a project that had a shape even before it had an official name. To me, studios with this kind of origin tend to make games with more intention. It's not a company built around a license to capitalize on an opportunity. It's a team that waited for the right moment, chose the right project, and is now pouring into Invincible VS everything they've accumulated since the Killer Instinct days. This shows up in the final product, and you'll feel it when you play.